Oh, a microphone. Hi, my name is Philip Scorza, and I'd like to welcome you to our show, Points of Interest. We're about 30, 35 miles north of the city of Santa Clarita, up near the Grapevine. If you've ever driven Interstate 5 north, you've had to go over the Grapevine right at Fort Tejon. Well, that's about where we are. Actually, we're in the town of Frazier Park here, and we're going to take you around today and tell you about some of the history that occurred around the Grapevine. Some very interesting stories to tell you. But first, we've got to find somebody to take us around.
Who is it?
It's Philip Scorza. Can Jerry come out to play?
Philip Scorza? Get off my property.
Now that I've recovered from looking down the business end of Jerry's 44, Jerry Reynolds, can you tell us where we're going to go today and what we're going to see?
Well, since you want to do something about the Grapevine, I thought maybe we'd go over to Lebeck. We'll talk about the Indians that lived there, some of the first Spanish explorers. We'll go over to the site of the original village of Kash'tuk that is now known today as Castaic, and see where the name Castaic came from. And they will drop by old Fort Tejon and see if some of the camels are left from Beale's old camel caravans.
We're right beside Interstate 5, just south of the Grapevine, right, Jerry?
Yeah, the name Grapevine actually dates way back to 1772. It began when a Spanish lieutenant, or actually a captain by that time, Pedro Fages, he was in charge of the Presidio down at San Diego, and during the night, 6 of his men went running off with 6 comely young Indian maidens. And so Don Pedro took a rather dim view of that and rounded up some of his troops, first Catalonian volunteers, went tearing off looking for his troops, who'd run off, of course, as I mentioned, with the girls. Best soldiers will do even today.
I've heard that.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so off they went, and of course they went out of San Diego, north over the Cajon Pass, into the Mojave Desert, and finally down the Santa Clara riverbed. In fact, Pedro Fages left such names as Agua Dulce and Soledad Canyon behind, which were still in use today.
He got to name all those places.
Oh, yeah, he named all those places, sure.
And he was still searching for the 6 soldiers that ran off with the comely,
with the Indian girls, Anyway, the troops finally in the spring came right up from where we're standing, and at this point he paused and noticed that there was an awful lot of grapevines growing around here, what they call big red Cimarron grapes. So what he did was name the place Cañada de las Uvas, the Canyon of the Grapes.
Cañada de las Uvas.
Right.
And so the name grapevine actually comes from grapes which grow naturally in the area. Are they still found in the area?
Oh, yeah, you can still find them. You don't find them around here. We're in Lebeck, but a little bit farther down, going down toward the little town of Grapevine. You can see them growing up in hills, things like that. Yeah.
So where are we off to next?
So, one of the stops that Pedro Fages made was at an old lake, which is called Castaic, and it's where the town Castaic comes from, you know, the little town down Santa Clarita. So, another place name.
Yeah, so let's head out then.
Okay.
Okay. We're here on the Tejon Ranch, which was started many, many years ago by General Beale, I believe, right? And we're looking at what, Jerry?
Yeah, we're looking down at the original Castaic Lake, not that phony thing that Water Resources built many years later. But cutting right down through the valley that we came up is the San Andreas Fault, and it's joined here by the Garlock Fault. And of course, because of this depression down in the ground, over the years, rainwater has collected, and right now we're looking at the original Castaic Lake.
It's perfectly natural.
Perfectly natural, yeah. From here, Castaic Creek drains down to the community of Castaic, and then finally joins the Santa Clara River at Castaic Junction. But originally it was Kash'tuk, K-S-T-U-K, which the Indians translate as being eyes, or, you know, like eyeballs.
Oh,
and it kind of reflects like eyes, I guess.
Yeah.
But because of the lake, the fish, all the abundance of game, there used to be pronghorn antelope in here, and your favorite grizzly bears. The Indians from all over would gather here, usually in August, and kind of have a combination family reunion, 4th of July, New Year's Eve, and exchange, you know, gifts, and a lot of times for the young men to meet women and things like that.
That's necessary.
Oh, yes, indeed. You know, if you want to carry on the species.
Right. what tribe is this? The Tataviam Indians?
Well, this is where they all came together. You had the Chumash coming over from the Fraser Park area. You had the Yokuts coming up from the San Joaquin Valley, and from the Santa Clarita, you had the Tataviam Indians meeting here. And this was a Tataviam village, I guess the farthest north, and this was called Kash'tuk.
Right here where we're standing, right here and behind us too?
Right, yeah. And of course, it was here in 1772 that Pedro Fages, whom we've already met, came around the lake and met with the Indians, and they said, you know, what do you call this place? And the Indians said, you know, Kash'tuk.
Kash'tuk.
Yeah. Oh, so over the years, it's been changed from Kash'tuk to Castac and Castac and a few other things. But if you look at a map, this area is spelled C-A-S-T-A-C without the I. And the modern community, of course, is C-A-S-T-A-I-C, Castac. So.
Well, of course, it has everything that the Indians need. There's fish to be found there and fresh water to drink, and just a great place to have your village.
Great place, you know. Wouldn't you like to have a house here?
This is $1 million view.
It really is. Really. And of course, later on in 1776, Father Garcés came through. He was a remarkable person all by himself. He hiked across the whole southwest and up into California and on into the San Joaquin Valley.
Now, was this still an Indian village in the 1700s?
And he stopped here and again met with the Indians, and they exchanged food and gifts and one thing along another. But that's Father Garcés always amazes me when you read about him. I mean, just all alone, you know, no motels, no villages, no nothing, you know. Boom, here he goes.
A loner, the man who had to travel.
Yes, he sure did.
So let's see now. If I'm correct in my dates, the Fort Tejon was 1854. So the fort sort of overlapped the Indian village then.
Yes, it did. In fact, it's strange, but the fort was actually established to protect the Indians, quote, according to the Act of Congress. Usually, you think of forts like General Custer going out and doing battle with them, but it was actually established to protect the Indians and also to guard the Grapevine Pass coming up here. It was full of horse thieves, cattle thieves. Our old buddy Tiburcio Vasquez.
Right, old
you know,
right, yes. But so they were protecting the Indians from what, developers?
From the developers, the settlers, and one thing or another like that.
I see.
Yeah.
So that this land could remain theirs.
Right. Well, this became a Spanish or a Mexican land grant in 1843. This was El Rancho Castac. And, of course, later on, Edward F. Beale came in, and he began buying up all the real estate, and Castac became part of his Tejon Ranch.
I see.
Yeah, so that's how it got to be Tejon today. Of course, after Beale died, his son Truxton took over, and eventually he sold to the Chandler family. And the Chandlers, who own the Times Mirror Corporation, own it today. In fact, mentioning the Chandlers, they used to have a little hunting lodge right over here. If you'd like to walk over,
yeah, I'd like to see that site of that,
too. See that, too. It's
Great.
gone now, but you can see where it was.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. Watch out for rattlesnakes.
Watch out for rattlesnakes. Thanks for warning me, Jerry. So you told me this is this little forested area is where the Chandlers had what, a hunting lodge?
Yeah, they had a hunting lodge. Probably originally started as kind of like a line cabin on a Tejon ranch. In case I hadn't mentioned it, Tejon means badger in Spanish.
Oh no, you didn't mention that.
Well, it is badger.
Okay. Badger.
And the Chandlers, after they bought the property, had a little hunting lodge in here. And I'm told that the walls were lined with copies of the L.A. Times for some reason or another.
For some reason or another, yes, yes.
Anyway, it stood here and burned down one day.
Ah.
So about all that's left is a barbecue. You can find a few pieces of wood laying around and things like that. For some reason, the Chandlers never rebuilt it. I don't know why. Probably live in better quarters by now, you know.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so where are we off to now?
Okay, we're going to go back to Beartrap Canyon and talk about probably the world's most famous bear hunt in California, the one that William Randolph Hearst got himself involved with.
Oh, the Hearsts and the Chandlers. This sounds good.
Yeah, we got a newspaper war going here.
Let's get going. We're going to interview a cow. Just a second. Now this is, we're up in Beartrap Canyon, is that right?
Right, yeah.
And what happened here?
Well, there's a lot of stories about probably the most famous grizzly bear of old California. His name was Monarch. And the story actually has been told about being in one place and another, but it really took place right here. And the reason I'm carrying this piece of paper around is I have the written evidence of it, which I'd be glad to read to you.
Oh, okay.
But of course, the story started actually when William Randolph Hearst was given the San Francisco Examiner by his father, the senator.
He was given it.
He was given it.
Got it.
You know, he just got out of Harvard. He needed a little graduation present, so he gave him the Examiner. Actually, the Examiner was in very bad shape. It was failing. So Hearst started this typical sort of razzle-dazzle campaign to build up circulation. And in fact, one of his mottos was, you know, if you don't find news, we'll go out and create it.
I see.
So anyway, in 1889, he and one of his reporters, Walt Kelly, were sitting around the newsroom office, and they had a little story going about grizzly bears. And Hearst said, oh, there aren't any grizzly bears left in California. Well, Walt said, well, I'm sure there's some down around Santa Paula, because I just heard a report of, you know, one being killed down there.
Okay.
So Hearst said, well, okay, I'll give you a blank check. You go down there, you capture this bear, and you bring it back to San Francisco. So Kelly said, okay, fine, blank check. He takes off. He goes to Santa Paula, right? Okay, so he meets this guy, Doc Guberson. And the doctor was you know, very respected, later became a judge, but he every so often liked to go off and go rusticating in the mountains. And he'd always took a bunch of cronies with him. And they went up and they had a couple of weeks, you know, on a hunting party. So here comes Walt Kelly and says, I'll pay you to guide me into the mountains. Well, Doc said, you know, anybody willing to pay must be out of their mind, but come on, we'll take you. So he joined up with his son, Idell. And, of course, there was DeMoss Bowers. Bowers' father, Stephen Bowers, owned the Ventura Star, was the one that found Bowers Cave, you know, over by the Chiquita Canyon landfill today. Okay, so off they go and a few other guys. And, of course, Guberson and Bowers and the rest of them were just going to take old Kelly for everything that they possibly could, and they milked him all the way up Sespe Creek. And when the whiskey ran out, you know, and Kelly got a little suspicious, well, they went out and they faked a few bear tracks here and there. And so,
just to keep the money coming, right?
The money coming, yeah. Well, this started in June, and by October, Kelly was, you know, just a little, you know, he realized finally what was going on. He says, you know, if we don't produce a grizzly bear, I'm going someplace else. Well, that's where the story kind of diverges, is where this bear came from. But as I mentioned, Bowers was editor of the Ventura newspaper, and his son, Idell, was always writing him these letters about what went on. And I have here one of the letters he wrote about how the bear was captured and who caught it. And it's funny that you should be out here interviewing these cattle, because it was the vaqueros, actually, that caught Monarch, the famous bear of old California.
Probably didn't have a microphone in their hand.
No, they didn't.
So are you going to read this letter to us? Okay.
Anyway, here's Idell Bowers to his father, and this was published in the Ventura paper on October 6, 1889. And he says, I quote, a huge grizzly was known to a vaquero living near Castaic Lake as being Mucho Diablo. You know, Mucho Diablo, you know, big bear. I mean, big devil.
Big devil.
Big devil,
yeah.
Okay. Because of the great fear in which he was held. The vaquero told of Mucho Diablo getting 2 or 3 steers from Beal's Los Alamos ranch every week and keeps fat. His tracks measure 7 by 13 inches, and his weight is estimated at from 900 to 1,200 pounds. He goes on, he says, your correspondent had the pleasure of meeting a real live grizzly a short time ago. His broomship had killed a steer near camp, and the next evening ye scribe went up to the carcass. When within about 40 yards of the deceased steer, I saw the bear eating his supper. After watching him a moment, not having a rifle with me, I quietly withdrew at good speed and went to camp 300 or 400 yards away. Accompanied by Kelly, we climbed a hill, but it grew darker, becoming too dark to see the bear at all. Well, we are standing at the camp. This is called Beartrap because they had built a bear trap here right in back of Castaic Lake. And, of course, they had tried to entice this bear into the bear trap, but it did no good at all. So now we find out how the bear was actually caught, because 6 days later, on October 12th, Bowers wrote from Gorman Station, assured of a quick sale, the California vaqueros captured the bear by the same old reliable method had always been used to subdue a grizzly, on horseback with a riata. And you see these old pictures of them capturing bears by throwing ropes over them. They drug it into the cage. Kelly paid him off. And so there they were. So
they got him alive.
Yeah.
So
Kelly captured or had this bear and what to do with it, so they had to haul it down to the mountains, took it to the railhead in Palmdale, and of course shipped it up to San Francisco. And of course at that time, just everybody went wild. There are grizzly bears in California.
Yeah.
Hearst proved it, and of course he sold millions of newspapers.
and the bear was put in a...
Yeah, the bear was put in the Golden Gate Park up there, and was promptly named Monarch because Hearst's newspaper, the Examiner, was the monarch of the dailies, right?
Yeah.
And so there the bear lived until 1911, when it finally died. There were sketches made by such as Ernest Thomas Seton and some other prominent people. But when he died, let's see, I think I have the exact thing here. He died in 1911. At that time, he weighed 1,127 pounds. So he was a pretty good sized bear. He was probably only about 500 or 600 pounds when he was captured here. He lived quite well up there.
A lot of food and no exercise.
But that's where Hearst got his start. Walt Kelly fell into disfavor. As I said, Guberson later became a judge. The other guys became quite prominent.
And Monarch...
Monarch, of course, was a celebrated great bear of California that graced the masthead of the Examiner and all this stuff, But it was all, because of a lot of fun and drunken good times, a bunch of good old boys out in the woods having a good time at Hearst's expense.
So let me get this straight now. Walt Kelly and his drinking buddies, they started sometime in June, and they wound up way in October. And this is all on Mr. Hearst's blank check, is that right?
That's right. Of course, they went up the Sespe, camped for quite a while up on Mount Pinos, and finally, the vaqueros rounded up old Monarch right here in Beartrap Canyon.
This was their camp.
It's called Beartrap. Yeah. And this, by the way, is kind of an interesting rock we're sitting on. If you look at down in here, these big grooves were carved over years and years of Indians grinding acorns and buckwheat and things like that.
All these holes, huh?
All these holes. It's an old Indian grinding rock, and it probably rolled down from that hill in back of us.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is sort of a fitting end to the story of William Randolph Hearst, Walt Kelly, and Monarch of the Mountains.
Okay.
Yes. Suppose now would be a good time to mention, while you're enjoying this beautiful scenery and wildlife and everything, that this is private property, part of the Tejon Ranch Incorporated, and to enter you must get permission from the Tejon operators. So don't try to come back here on your own. Some of these cowboys run around back here with loaded shotguns, so a word to the wise, I think, is sufficient, don't you?
Wildlife is abundant at the Tejon Ranch, as witness this herd of deer we saw near the side of the road.
Oh, yeah, I'm showboating.
Well, we're up at Fort Tejon now, and we have one more juicy grizzly bear story to tell you. Jerry, you want to take it from there?
Well, we're standing in front of the Peter Lebeck Oak, as it is called, and it was in 1853 when Lieutenant Richardson, U.S. Topographical Engineers, was mapping all this area up and through here. And he camped right on this spot, and he looked over at this oak tree, and there was a sign carved into the bark. And it said, Peter Lebeck, killed by an ex-bar, October 17, 1837.
Oh, wow.
And so obviously there was some guy named Peter Lebeck buried here by the tree, but he made note of it and went on. Later on, when Fort Tejon was established a year later, 1854, again, the people that began building everything noticed the tree and the bark and one thing and another. But after a while, the bark actually grew back, so that it was covering over the old sign about Peter Lebeck. So again, much later, 1898, there was a group down in Bakersfield, and they were called the Foxtail Rangers. And their big deal was to go around, debunk legends and myths and things like this, and hunt down ghosts. And they had a great time, take some champagne, and go out and party in the hills. And
sounds like Walt Kelly and his group.
Kind of like that, except they brought their wives and kids along. So anyway, so they came up here and they said, well, I guess this is supposed to be the Lebeck Oak. So they started cutting away the bark, and by God, they found under the bark kind of a mirror image of this thing where the bark had grown over it, and the Peter Lebeck sign. So the Foxtail Rangers said, well, let's see if there's anything in the tree. So they started digging a trench around the tree, right? Pretty soon, right here where this monument is, they came upon a skeleton. And it was a man a little over 6 feet tall, and he had his left arm missing, his ribs were caved in, and he looked a terrible mess. So obviously that was Peter Lebeck, and obviously he was got eaten by a bear, right?
Yeah.
So a little later, whenever this monument was put up to commemorate Peter Lebeck, and the town of Lebeck itself is named Peter Lebeck, but who was he? Nobody knows.
So all we know is that somebody named Peter Lebeck was killed here, and his body was buried. Obviously, somebody had to bury the body, and this was in 1837.
Right.
And that was discovered in 1853 for the first time.
For the first time. Now, of course, there was speculation that Peter Lebeck, having a French name, was a French fur trapper that came down with the Hudson Bay Company. But if they were all Frenchmen, how come they carved the inscription in English? So obviously there were some English speakers along with them.
So now my question now is are Peter Lebeck's remains still planted here, or have
still
they?
There.
They are.
The Foxtail Rangers dug him up, but they left him just as they found him, buried him right back down again. And the most recent speculation about who Peter Lebeck was comes all the way from New Mexico. There was a group of, you might say, outlaws or cattle rustlers, horse thieves, used to raid across the Southwest. They were called Chirabascos. And the Chirabascos came out of New Mexico and raided through over here. In fact, they were quite badly known. They used to mount big military expeditions to come up and catch them. And so probably Lebeck was one of these Chirabascos, because it was a mixed group of Spaniards and French and, general outcasts of the community. And probably he was one of these guys, and he got nailed up here. They buried him and went on their merry way, so that's why there's no record of Lebeck anywhere else.
By one of Monarch's predecessors.
Yeah. So, if you want to get famous and renowned and have a tree dedicated to you, just go out and get eaten up by a bear, and that's all it takes.
I'll remember that.
Right.
Anyway, just so you people at home know, we're up at Fort Tejon, like I said, and this is the third weekend of August, and every third weekend, I understand, they have these Civil War battles that they stage up here, and that's why you see so many people up here right now, and some of the weaponry and that sort of thing. And one of these shows, we're going to have to come up and just deal with that exclusively for you.
North.
Well, we've had a really nice time today traveling on the Fort Tejon property. I'm sorry, the Tejon Ranch property. And I'd like to thank Jerry Reynolds, the curator for the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society, for taking us along on this tour, telling us the story of all of these great grizzly bears that no longer exist in our neighborhood. And maybe that's a good thing, too, considering how they all turned out. And I'd like to thank our camera operator, Bob Campbell, for being along today. I'd like to thank Bobby and Casey for being along for the ride. And I'd like to thank you people at home for watching us.